Yo, what is good, everyone? So a common question that a lot of people ask is, what's the best lens for street photography? And since a lot of the content on this channel is focused around street photography, I thought I would take the chance to show you guys how certain lenses perform when you're going out there and shooting street. So in this video, I will only be using a 35mm lens to walk around New York and take some street shots. But before we get into it, let me know in the comments below how you think a 35mm lens will perform on the street. And also, I would like to know what focal length you like shooting the most, and maybe I'll do a test of that one in the next video. As usual, there will be POV footage, and I will voice over my thought process as I'm taking the shot, along with some composition tips and techniques. So if you find these videos helpful, definitely give it a thumbs up so I know to make more of them. Alright, let's just dive right in and see if 35mm is good for street photography. So I start off this photo walk on the south side of Chinatown by the Manhattan Bridge. I know this area has some tighter alleyways, so it would be interesting to see how the 35 fares. As I'm crossing the street, I see this woman standing on the corner with a nice rim light around her right hand side. This image ended up being washed out from the sun flare, but it was still a nice start to make sure I got my settings right. As I walk past, I spot this woman at the end of this narrow pathway. This photo was pretty terrible because I couldn't get close enough. A longer lens like an 85mm would have been able to cut out the clutter in the foreground and isolate the subject better. After walking down the other side, I found a small market tucked under the Manhattan Bridge. This was such a cool area. I had no idea that this was even here. I took this shot and it's nothing special, but I do love the natural teal and orange split toning here. The woman walking by just adds a little bit of movement to this frame. As I'm walking through the market, I wrap around the other side and capture an image of this guy walking out with bags of groceries. This is where I wish I had a wider lens to be able to capture more of the scene, like the arches and the rafters. Now I wanted to capture another image where you can tell that this market is under the bridge. But as you can see, the 35 was only wide enough to get the bottom of the pillar in the shot. You couldn't really tell where you were. I definitely need to come back here with a wider lens. But walking out of the market, I am back on the narrow pathway, and this image is a keeper. I love the gritty graffiti on the windows and the way the light is spilling in from the doorway. The 35 was a perfect focal length to use here. Now, as you saw, a 35mm could work for tight spaces, but for a lot of those shots, I wish I had a wider lens. Even something like a 24mm could have made a lot of those shots better. Now let's move on to medium spaces, where I think the 35mm focal length will really shine. In this area, the streets are wide enough to let cars drive through, so it should be a great area to test out the 35. Because it should allow for more environmental context, which just helps tell that story. For example, in this shot, you have the context to know that you're in a dark alley somewhere, and in order to achieve this stark contrast, I exposed for the light at the end of the street. Turning left, I noticed this door open with a circular glass window. I experimented with shooting through the glass to see what kind of effect I can get. The problem here is that I forgot to change my aperture. And because this was shot at f1.4, only the door is in focus. If I had shot this at f8 or f10, the person walking towards me would be in focus too. Turning the corner, I see this shopping cart chained to the sign on the sidewalk. The way the light is casting shadows across the wall also adds a ton of visual interest. As I'm walking through Chinatown, it's so sad to see these streets empty. I remember when it used to be packed with people eating, hanging out, and playing games. As I approached the end of the street, I saw this guy with a full silver suit walking in front of this graffiti wall. I chose a creative crop here and decided to go for a really wide crop. If you like this video so far, definitely give it a thumbs up. And share it with your friends who are also interested in photography to see what kind of focal length they should use. After walking along the main road for a few blocks, I turned into another side street where the light cuts harshly against the building. So I tried again, but with a puddle reflection shot, and this one was much better. The person walking past the scene with a green jacket was just a lucky coincidence because red and green are complementary colors, so it fit the frame well. Alright, so medium spaces really show the strengths of the 35mm focal length. It might be the sweet spot for street photography. But I still need to test how this lens does in wide open spaces. So for this next part of the photo walk, I am looking for some wider and longer streets with more open space. This alleyway with a nice contrasty light was a great place to start. There was this man walking down on the other end and I captured this shot. This was cropped in tight, so if I had a longer lens, the result probably would have been much better. On the same corner, I captured this delivery biker. Exposing for the light allowed the details in the brick and the graffiti to be clear, as the rest falls into shadow for a moody vibe. Crossing the street, I got down low for another puddle shot, and this capture would have been perfect if the car had more character just to match the buildings better. Walking further down the street, I framed this image where the layers of the buildings are filling the frame. This captures the raw feeling of standing in that alleyway with the buildings in front of you. Moving on, I saw this triangle of light against the building across the street. The test shot came out perfect, balancing for both the highlights and shadows. I waited for people to walk by and ended up capturing this image. Again, I had to crop in a bit, but nothing too bad. The 35mm worked really well here. On my way back to the subway, I took a shot of some of these buildings with the Freedom Tower in the distance. I got really lucky with the light and the clouds here. Then I noticed another slice of light, cutting harshly down across the green wall. I captured a few images here, but this one of the man pushing these boxes was my favorite. Back in the crowded section of Chinatown, I captured this shot of some construction. Although it's a busy image, the entire scene is just filled with things to look at. The people, the architecture, and of course that dramatic light. This last shot of the day was taken under the subway bridge as this old man was crossing the street. Again, a longer lens would have been better to isolate him, but the sun was perfectly backlighting the man, separating him from the dark shadows in the back. Alright, so now you guys saw just how well a 35 can perform in narrow, medium, and wide spaces. So what'd you think? It's a pretty versatile lens, right? Ideally, it would be nice to have a wider and a longer lens as I'm walking around and doing street in order to optimize my shots. But if I had only one lens, the 35 might be it. Let me know what focal length you want me to test out in my next video. And if you like this content and want to support my channel, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe. It means a lot. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace.